How ignoring the obvious created a breakthrough. Everyone saw it. That was the strange part. The signal wasn't hidden, encrypted, or buried deep in obscure reports. It sat in plain sight, repeated over and over, quietly dismissed because it felt too simple to matter. And for years, ignoring it seemed like the smart choice. The company was surrounded by complexity. Markets were volatile. Technology evolved monthly. Strategy documents grew thicker. In that environment, obvious answers felt suspicious. Real breakthroughs were supposed to be sophisticated, data-heavy, and difficult to explain. Anything too clear was assumed to be incomplete. But clarity doesn't announce itself as genius. It waits. To understand why ignoring the obvious became transformative, we need to go back to a time when the company believed its biggest challenges were external. Competition, pricing pressure, feature parity. Leadership focused on solving visible problems, the ones that showed up in dashboards and quarterly reviews. And by doing so, they overlooked the most persistent signal of all. Users kept doing the same thing. They bypassed features. They ignored recommended paths. They built workarounds with almost no friction. And when asked why, they gave the same answer in different words. The product made things harder than they needed to be. The feedback was consistent, clear, repetitive, and easy to ignore. After all, the system worked. Metrics were healthy. Growth continued. The friction users described didn't break the experience. It just slowed it slightly, enough to notice, not enough to panic. And in successful companies, panic is often the only catalyst for change. So the signal stayed visible and untouched. Inside the organization, teams assumed the obvious explanation couldn't be the real one. If the fix were truly that simple, it would have been addressed years ago. Instead, they searched for deeper causes, more complex models, more elegant solutions. They optimized around the friction, instead of questioning why it existed at all. This is where the reveal begins. Because the breakthrough didn't come from discovering something new. It came from finally acknowledging what had been obvious all along, and realizing that the hardest ideas to accept are often the ones staring directly at you. The obvious signal refused to fade, no matter how many times it was explained away. Each new cohort of users behaved the same way as the last. They skipped steps. They ignored guidance. They created their own shortcuts. And each workaround pointed to the same friction, unnecessary complexity where simplicity would have sufficed. The reveal deepened. Data analysis confirmed what intuition had already suggested. Tasks took longer than they should. Completion rates dipped at predictable moments. Support tickets described confusion in polite, repetitive language. None of it indicated failure. But together, it revealed a system that demanded more effort than users wanted to give. Still, the company hesitated. Simplifying felt risky. Removing steps meant losing control. Allowing users to move freely challenged long-standing assumptions about safety, quality, and consistency. Complexity had become a form of protection, a way to ensure predictable outcomes. Letting go of it felt irresponsible. The conflict intensified when a small internal experiment was approved. One team was allowed to remove a single well-known friction point. Nothing radical, just one unnecessary confirmation step that users had complained about for years. The test group wasn't large. The stakes weren't dramatic, and the results weren't flashy. They were undeniable. Completion rates improved immediately. Errors decreased. Engagement increased without any added features. The product felt lighter, faster, more human. The obvious solution worked exactly as users had been saying it would. The response was mixed. Some celebrated the clarity. Others warned of unintended consequences. What if simplification introduced risk elsewhere? What if edge cases multiplied? What if users made mistakes without guidance? The fear wasn't about the result. It was about what it implied. If removing one obvious friction created such impact, how many others had they ignored? That question triggered unease across the organization, because it suggested the company's complexity wasn't always a mark of sophistication. Sometimes it was just unexamined habit. The conflict sharpened as more tests were proposed. Each one pointed in the same direction. Each success made the old logic harder to defend. And with every improvement, The gap between what the system enforced and what users needed became more visible. Ignoring the obvious had once felt prudent. Now it felt like avoidance. And the company stood at the edge of a deeper realization that the breakthrough they were chasing might not require building more, but finally removing what never needed to be there in the first place. The realization unsettled everything. If the biggest gains came from removing friction instead of adding features, then years of effort had been built on the wrong instinct. Complexity hadn't been a necessity. It had been a habit, reinforced by success and protected by fear. The conflict escalated quickly. Teams began auditing workflows, and the results were uncomfortable. Steps existed only because they always had. Safeguards overlapped without purpose. Interfaces assumed users needed instruction when they simply needed freedom. Every layer told the same story. The system had been designed to prevent mistakes, not to enable momentum. Engineers warned that simplification could expose hidden dependencies. Designers worried that reducing structure would create inconsistency. Leadership feared that removing controls might introduce risk they couldn't measure. And yet, every test reinforced the same truth. The more obvious friction they removed, the better the system performed. The emotional peak arrived when a larger simplification was approved. A core flow, central to the product identity, was redesigned from scratch. Entire steps disappeared. Defaults replaced choices. Guardrails softened. The release went live quietly, without marketing or explanation. The reaction was immediate. Users moved faster. Drop-offs collapsed. Support volume fell instead of rising. The system didn't spiral into chaos. It stabilized. The fear that complexity was holding everything together evaporated in real time. But the success revealed something dangerous. The system beneath the surface wasn't built for this level of fluidity. As usage accelerated, hidden bottlenecks surfaced. Data pipelines lagged. Performance wavered. The product wanted to move faster than its foundation allowed. This was the true conflict. Simplification had unlocked demand the company couldn't yet support. The breakthrough was real, but incomplete. Removing friction had exposed a deeper requirement. Rebuilding the core to match the simplicity users instinctively embraced. The obvious solution had worked. Now it demanded courage, because if the company stopped here, it would regress. And if it continued, it would have to confront the most difficult truth of all, that the system had been built for control, not trust. And trust, once earned, changes everything. They chose trust, not recklessly and not all at once, but deliberately, with the understanding that simplicity without support would collapse under its own success. The breakthrough wasn't just about removing friction. It was about rebuilding the foundation to sustain a system that respected how people actually think and work. The rebuild focused on alignment. Data flows were streamlined, bottlenecks eliminated, infrastructure redesigned to support speed without sacrificing reliability. Safeguards shifted from rigid enforcement to intelligent detection. The system stopped forcing correct behavior and started accommodating real behavior. Slowly, everything changed. Performance stabilized even as usage accelerated. Errors declined as workflows simplified. Support teams reported fewer issues, not more. The product became easier to use and easier to maintain, a combination few believed possible before the shift. This was the climax. Ignoring the obvious had delayed progress for years. Acknowledging it unlocked momentum instantly. But the true breakthrough came when the company committed to sustaining that clarity instead of retreating from it. They didn't just simplify the surface. They rebuilt the core to make simplicity durable. In the resolution, the lesson was unavoidable. The most powerful innovations often arrive disguised as common sense. They're overlooked not because they're wrong, but because they challenge the complexity we mistake for intelligence. Growth doesn't always come from adding more. Sometimes it comes from removing what never belonged. The breakthrough didn't come from a new feature, a bold acquisition, or a radical strategy. It came from finally listening. So, what do you think? Are we repeating the same mistake again? How